Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors webinar series on developing effective e-commerce sales strategies in China. You have joined us for day 4 of the webinar series. Thus far, over the last 3 days, we've been looking at the various business models that can be created in the e-commerce sector in China. We've looked at what it means to use effective communication in the Chinese market. And yesterday, we looked at what it's like working with a Chinese partner and what you need to pay attention to when negotiating and signing contracts. Today, I'm very pleased that Miria from ANZ Law Firm is back to look at the specific legalities surrounding the e-commerce market in China. So let's begin first with our usual administration slides. For those of you that are new to the GoToWebinar system, note that if you are based in China, you may have to use a VPN to have a better and more stable line and connection. If there are any technical difficulties, which we don't assume will arise, but you never know with the internet system, don't exit from the control panel. Usually it takes about 30 seconds to 1 minute for us to rejoin. When you are on your GoToWebinar control panel, you have the option of using your computer audio or a landline. And here you can see what it looks like. Generally, people will choose the computer audio sign. However, if you are having technical difficulties, you may want to switch to the landline. You will be prompted to this screen here, which will give you a number to dial in, an access code, and an audio PIN. In addition, if you have any questions or comments, please don't be shy. Our aim is always to achieve a 10 to 15 minute Q&A at the end of the session. We generally focus on the questions that were asked in the registration forms. If there is time, we will also ask questions that have been directed during the presentation. If, however, we have run out of time and we haven't answered your question, don't think we won't. Miria or myself will be answering them following the session today. So let's go ahead and test the system. If you would be so kind as to click on the hand button in your control panel, that will allow me to know that you're listening in. Thank you very much for that. You can re-click on the hand button and it will remove itself from your control panel. So let's begin with today's session. For those of you that have not joined our webinar series before, allow me to introduce who we are. Woodburn Accountants and Advisors is specialized in inbound investment into China and Hong Kong. We establish, manage, and administer companies in both jurisdictions to meet our clients' specific requirements and needs. We provide services from pre-investment stage all the way through to implementation and ongoing services, as well as cross-border investment advisory and tax optimization and corporate restructuring. Our clients are all international companies that are focused on entering the Asian market with the need of going in either China or Hong Kong. Just a small disclaimer, we have attendees and registrants that are from a wide variety of sectors and industries. As such, the presentation today is a general view of the regulations related to e-commerce in China. There have been a couple of questions that have come in that have been very sector specific. If we do have time at the end, I will raise 1 or 2 of those questions just so you have an idea of what it means being sector specific. But if we don't, like I said, we will be answering those questions after the session. A little bit about myself. My name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors, and I will be the moderator of today's session. I arrived in Shanghai in 2003 and have been in the corporate services sector for over 15 years now. I've seen many things on the Chinese market, from clients' experiences, my own experiences, from friends' experiences, that may be shocking at times. But as Miria highlighted in yesterday's webinar through her case studies, all types of companies incur obstacles along their China journey. And the key part is understanding that there are providers on the market, like Miria and myself, that can aid and assist with these situations. Miria and I work and collaborate together on client cases. Being a corporate service provider, I can't do what Miria does in terms of mediation and arbitration and dealing with negotiations between various parties. I'm more of in a role of implementing actual services and providing ongoing accounting, tax, and payroll services. So this is actually how Miria and I cross-refer clients to each other and work together on specific client cases when troubles do begin. So I'll stop talking for the rest of the session until the Q&A, and I will allow Miria to introduce herself and her company to you if you didn't join yesterday's session. Miria?
Thank you very much, Christina. Very nice introduction of you too. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon or evening, depending when you are listening to us. For those of you who didn't listen yesterday webinar, I'm the director of the European American market and overseas investment projects at ANC Law Firm, which is a Chinese law firm. As you can see, I'm coming from a very diverse background, working in different organizations, institutions, but importantly for you to know, I came to China in 2007, just before the Olympics, where I stayed in Beijing for a few years. And then I moved to Shanghai, where I'm living in the last years and mainly working at ANC Law Firm. Just a few words about ANC, not too much. You know that we are a legal service provider. Therefore, we mainly provide services to foreign companies, of course, sometimes to Chinese companies as well. And we cover several legal practices. We usually used to say we cover aspects from A to C, right? So that means before you enter in, perhaps you are required of legal opinions or reviewing of contract. But of course, during your business operation in China, you may encounter other legal issues that you require local lawyers. Then just a few two main aspects about us that I like to mention. So as you can see in the next slide, there are some of our features, right? But I like to highlight two. One is that we are a multicultural and multidisciplinary team, because we have many Chinese lawyers specialized in a specific legal practice, because you know the legal industry is very specialized, but we also have foreign employees and business advisors, so that gives us the overview of the client, which is a company, and that's very important. The other thing is we're local, right? We're a Chinese law firm, therefore we think locally, but we are globally, because many of our companies are coming from different jurisdictions, or they are multinationals. Of course, there are SMEs as well, but it's important to not lose that international standard perspective. Now, let's move to our presentation today. The topic we're gonna cover today is, again, e-commerce, but we thought it was important to look at it from a legal perspective or from a regulatory framework, because there are different aspects to look at. So if we see in the table of contents, today we're gonna try to cover different aspects. Of course, one of them is e-commerce law, because it's quite recent and you need to be aware of it at least. Nevertheless, there are other laws and regulations that are very much linked to e-commerce industry, and many companies are also interested to know about those aspects. So we are gonna try to give you a general overview of them. Nevertheless, it's a lot of information, so I'm gonna try to be a little bit fast. But if we are unable to respond all your expectations, please feel free to let us know too. So let's start. Just a few numbers about e-commerce. Since our previous speakers and Christina also highlighted several times, e-commerce market in China, obviously it's very important, but not only in China, also globally. Having said so, even if you have many business opportunities, you need to be aware as well that the competition is quite fierce. We have many actors already playing in the market, and you have a lot of Chinese actors, and they are quite aggressive, very fast speed, and on top of that, we also have a consumer that is very aware of the possibilities of the market, and that makes the Chinese consumer extremely demanding when it comes to e-commerce. And therefore, the laws and regulations we will look at them today are linked to this particular context. So let's start, first of all, with the business models that you could apply. Well, Christina already explained to you on Monday about these models. I'm gonna try to do it from a different perspective in order to complement the models. So we have the three you can see in the slide. The first model is called personal luggage and parcel import, which is a model going B2C, and it works via international express courier, right? The second model will be also B2C, but we have a direct purchase import, and it's also via international express courier. This model, we usually call it DPI model in English. And then we have the bonded import, which is B2C, B2B2C, and this is via freight trade zone. This is a little bit more particular, I could say, from the Chinese market. Now let's look at them into a little bit of details one by one, right? So if you see the slides, the first model, LMP model, you can see in the draw one aspect which is very clear, and it's the company. The company is outbound, it's overseas. Meaning what? Meaning you don't need a legal entity in mainland China. And therefore, the process you can see of the entire process, it seems a little bit simplified compared to what we are going to see later on. So let me explain you a little bit how it works. Let's say we have a Chinese user that submits an order to an overseas website, right? And then the company sends the goods via international express courier. The user has to entrust a custom broker to make the declaration to customs, or it has to do it by him or herself. Customs will examine the declaration. If identify something irregular or anomalous, then they may call the inspection and guarantee to look at it as well. When the custom is finished, then the user will pay the duties and taxes to the custom and receive the goods. Now, this is a little bit different to the next model, which is the DPI model, right? So the DPI model, as you can see, it's also B2C, and it's also international express courier. But if you see the draw, where is the legal entity? It's already inbound, it's in mainland China. Now here is a main difference. If you go under this model, you are requested either to establish a company or finding a local partner. Now let's say you establish a company, then probably you will establish a GUFI, which is a wholly foreign owned enterprise, and is one of the most common investment vehicles for foreign investors, right, in mainland China. And be aware that I'm highlighting all the time mainland China, because it's not Hong Kong, it's not Taiwan, it's not Macau, different jurisdictions there, right? So in this model, let's see this process. We already can see in the slide there are more steps, and we can see a little bit some differences. So let's use the example. Let's say we establish a company. Let's say we establish a Goofy, right? So then you need to apply for the registration in e-commerce platform under the administration of Chinese customs. And the company needs to prepare the goods in an overseas storage. When the Chinese user submits the order, in this case in a domestic website, then the website will request the warehouse to send the goods via international express courier and make the customs declarations to the e-commerce platform, which is also a little bit different than the previous model. Now, once customs has approved, then the express courier will be sent the goods to the Chinese user directly. And then the website will pay the duties and taxes, which usually takes about 31 to 45 days after the release of customs. Now, if we move to the third model, which is the BI, this model we have said is B to B to C, right? And here you may see the draw and the process that it's quite similar to the previous one. So what is the difference here? Can you see it? So first of all, we have the legal entity, which is also in mainland China, or again, if it's not a legal entity, it's a local partner, right? Okay, we can also see there are a lot of steps, pretty similar, but can you notice that we have the bonding warehouse, and this is one of the main difference, because your company, the foreign company, will import the goods into the bonded warehouse. You may have one or you may rent it, it's up to you. But then once the goods arrive there, they are stored there. Then you will send the goods to the Chinese user from this bonded warehouse. And after the Chinese user submits the order into the domestic website, right? So the rest of the process, it seems a little bit similar to the previous one. So now let's see between this BI model and the previous model, DPI model, one thing that you need to be very aware of. And it's when we talk about the e-commerce platform. So in the next slide, we will see draw, because sometimes image, it's much more easier to understand the words, where you can see this e-commerce platforms, what it is. So both models, the DPI and the BI model, remember these two models that require to have a legal entity in mainland China or a partner. So in these two models, it is required for the foreign company to register in the e-commerce platform with the payment enterprise and the logistic enterprise together. So how does this work? Let me explain you a little bit very briefly. So a foreign company will send the information related to the payment firm to this platform, right? And then meanwhile, a logistic company and an operator of customs supervised areas to the e-commerce platforms, and when it applies for the registration of such platform. In the case that the Chinese user submits the order in the website, then this user, this person, will provide his or her ID details information to this website. And then the website will use such information to make the declaration. So here is a big difference compared to the first model, right? Now let's move to the next slide and see something that it's important also to highlight, because it depends on the model you use. You may need to be aware of this list. This list is called List of Products Authorized for retail import via China's cross-border e-commerce, right? And if you are again under the DPI and BI model, you really need to look at it. There are thousands of items listed, of course in Chinese, but there are all the items listed here that you are allowed to import. Now, it is very important that you verify that the goods you want to import are here, because otherwise you may not comply with the local laws and regulations. Now, having said so, let's see what advantages and disadvantages the three models bring. I would like to highlight here that there is no specific model that is better than the other one. It just depends on your business strategy, right? And it also depends on your capabilities and resources. So let's see L and P model. Of course, you can say that since you are not required to establish a legal entity or having a local partner, the investment capital that you need to initially put is lower. So that could be an advantage. Nevertheless, you need to be aware that if your targeted customer is Chinese, they usually look to Chinese websites and they are in Chinese, right? So that's something that could be a disadvantage. Another advantage here, of course, is custom clearance, as we just mentioned before. Now, when it comes to DPI and BI models, since these two models, they have the aspect that they need to establish a legal entity or have a partner, they have similar advantages and disadvantages. Of course, you have more products, a category of products, as we just mentioned in the previous slide. You can have also more competitive price and lower risk when it comes to transportation, particularly for the BI model. BI model, remember, is the bonded import model, right? So same thing, that is an advantage, it could be a disadvantage because there could be more risk in terms of the inventory you may have. Now, you should be aware of that in mainland China, you cannot apply to the BI model in the entire territory. You need to know that there are 37 cities in mainland China where you could apply to this because they have this free-trade zone or the bounded warehouse, and it's a bit limited perhaps. Nevertheless, you probably want to start in all the cities. So, you know, it's not that big issue, but you should know about that. Now let's move to something that is a bit administrative, but when we talk about e-commerce, industry is a must. And we're gonna talk about customs administration. Why? Because you know, before we had the China Inspection Guarantee Administration, SIG, and we also have General Administration of China Customs, the GAC, right? Now, last year, they merged together in one single administration. So it is not new. I know in the slide it says newly merged, but because it's already 1 year, but it's quite recent, and most of you should be aware of, but perhaps some of you didn't know yet. Now, the merge of this administration intends to simplify the process, to make things less paperwork because there is a more digitalized system, more efficient and a smoothly communication between previous SIG and GAC. Nevertheless, there are some steps that I would like to highlight, and therefore in the next slide we put them so you can also read them later on a bit more slower. But the first step is the online application, right, the detection. So we already talked about it. Customs use this online system to process and inspect order, logistics, and payment information. And of course, there is an internal SIG department that carry out the risk analysis of products that are notified by customs on the online system, particularly in specific categories. So as you can see in the inventory management, the goods are classified into categories, right? And those categories are negative, restricted, high risk, generalist. I would recommend you to really pay attention when you follow into high risk or when you have experimented some irregularities or anomalies before, because when it comes to the risk monitoring, SIG inspection can involve X-ray, manual sampling, and also testing of the goods that are notified by customs. And because everything should be now digitalized, so the record of your company, it's also very important. So to keep a good track record of your performance is also very important. So with whom you partner and with whom you do all this process is also very important. Once you have any anomaly or irregularity, it will be shown in the system. And it's very likely that if this happens, authorities will pay more attention. So you will like to avoid that actually. Now, let's move to the law as such, to e-commerce law. Don't worry, I'm not gonna get into too much details here, but it is mandatory for us to mention that we have an e-commerce law now in China, and it entered into effect this year in January, and it was the first law directly giving the framework to the e-commerce industry. Nevertheless, it's not the only regulation here, so you need to be aware that we have others, such as the ones listed here, and other notice as well in circulars. Nevertheless, no need today to go into so many details, but I would like to show some specific aspects that the e-commerce law tackles, and I think it's important to clarify for everybody. So let's see in the next slide who and what is covered by the e-commerce law. Now, who, you need to be aware that this law is going to define what the e-commerce business operator is. So I'm going to give you a brief definition, right, of this concept. So an e-commerce business operator is a natural person, legal person, and other legal entity and other non-legal person organizations that engage in business activities of sale of goods or provision of services through internet and other information networks, right? Now, what does this cover? Of course, the law applies to e-commerce activities in mainland China. Now, what you need to remind here is that an e-commerce business operator must complete market entity registration formalities, meaning what? You must have your Chinese business license, right? So this is quite important. Now let's move to the next slide and define three main concepts. So three main subjects that are covered in this law. You see these three boxes, right? So we have the operators on platforms, we have the platform operators, and we also have other e-commerce operators. What are they? Operators on platform refers to e-commerce operators that sell goods or provide services to customers through e-commerce platform. Okay, that's quite clear for everybody. But what are the platform operators? Well, here it's referred as any legal person or an incorporated organization that provides virtual basis of business, transaction making, information release, and other services to the parties of an e-commerce transaction to enable them to carry out independent transaction activities. Okay, very nice definition. So let's see the slide. So if I tell you Taobao, Dongjin, and Tmall, then you will recognize what a platform operator is. Nevertheless, you should be aware that we have others such as Meituan, Situate, Tenpin, all of them, right? Now, when it comes to Other e-commerce operators. What is that? What is other business operators? Well, it refers to e-commerce operators selling goods or providing services through self-established websites or channels other than the platforms. So I'm gonna give you an example. Let's say you see in your WeChat moments or in WeChat groups that somebody is selling goods or services. That will be defined as other e-commerce operators. Very good. So we have definitions that are important to understand under Chinese jurisdictions. Now let's see another important aspect that e-commerce law tackles, and that is IP protection matters, right? If we see in the next slide, we should highlight here that in the e-commerce law, now the IP right holder has the right to request the e-commerce platform operator to adopt measures when identifying IP infringements. And this is very important because before you could ask, but you didn't have the same right to request. And even more, whenever the e-commerce platform operator fails to adopt the required measure in a short time, then this e-commerce platform operator will bear joint and several liabilities with the business operator using the platform for the escalated portion of damages. And this is very important in terms of protection from a legal perspective. Now, of course, you can argue that, IP protection is still, a lot of room to improve in mainland China, which we cannot completely deny, but we will see those aspects later on, including some examples and some particular examples on detecting infringement and tackle them in the next section later on. Now, allow me to just highlight the latest part or aspect in e-commerce, and it refers to the consumers' protection. So e-commerce also brings this aspect. If we see in the next slide, we will see that there are 3 articles in the law that refers particularly to consumer protection. So this is quite relevant because it's telling us that consumer protection is becoming more and more relevant, particularly for the e-commerce business, right? Now, we don't need to read all of them. We have listed them. We have also highlighted the main aspect that they cover, and they are also organized by priority. But we need to know that despite these aspects of consumer protection, you should be aware that there are other regulations to pay attention to. So if we move to the next slide, we will see that there is another existing law regarding protection of rights and interests of consumers, including a notice that was effective this year as well, that is linked to work relating to improved regulation of cross-border e-commerce retail importation. And why is this important for you? Taking into consideration the 3 business models that we presented before, let's say you have selected the model DPI and BI model. Remember, these 2 models are the ones that you need the legal entity or the local partner in mainland China. Now, under these 2 models, the company has to bear main liabilities when it comes to quality and safety of goods. It is also liable for consumers' rights protection, but it also includes providing exchange services for the goods and also the establishment of a recall system for substandard and defective goods. And in addition, the company has to establish a quality and safety risk prevention and control mechanism for the goods. So you need to be very aware of that when you are working in this industry. Now let's move to the IP protection aspect. Of course, this is not following under the e-commerce law as such. However, because e-commerce always raises the concern among many foreign companies or producers about the situation in China. Now, we cannot deny that there is room for improvement, but we should also be a little bit fair and recognize that there has been huge improvements in the last 10 years, more or less. And again, I'm very aware of the, let's say, the weakness of the situation, because I'm myself member of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, and we obviously every year publish this position paper on IP matters. Nevertheless, I want to show you in this slide that there are not only improvements in the regulatory framework, but also in the administration. And here is one example, the IP courts. So for most of you already know that since 2014, they have been established specific IP courts where the judge is supposed to be an IP expert, but perhaps you didn't hear about the latest news, and it's that we have a Supreme People's Court IP Tribunal, which is the highest tier of courts in mainland China. So I think it's important also to recognize those. If we move to the next slide, I'll give you some data for you to know. So for example, in the Shanghai IP Court last year, there were some cause of actions, as you can see, and more than half of the cases were linked to copyright and patent. Copyright actually were 605 cases, excluding computer safe were copyright, right? That is another category, but also we have patents about 587 cases. So that shows you a little bit how the situation is working in the country. Now, if we move to the legal side, so what primary legal sources we have, we listed here the main ones. Nevertheless, there are more that you may need to pay attention to. We're not going to go into details, but this is just to give you an idea that perhaps the implementation could be improved, right? But at least there are some measures and mechanisms. And now if we move to the practical side in the next slide, we can see actually what type of IPR we can obtain in China. And if you look at it, actually it doesn't differ too much compared to other jurisdictions. Now, allow me to stress very strongly this issue. No matter what registration you have around the world in other jurisdictions, in Madrid, in international, please do a favor to yourself and register in mainland China with a Chinese authority. First of all, trademark is quite simple process and it's very cheap. Even a very small SME can afford it. It's very cheap. But it can be very costly if you don't have it. First of all, you need to know, or probably you know, but just in case, the trademark works as first come, first served. If I don't mistake, I remember Christina also highlighted this on Monday, right? Why is so important? Because if you do not do so, maybe somebody else does it, and then it's a problem. Because if you were in the first one, then you don't have the right of that trademark in China. And then when you have an issue or you are involved in a dispute or you need to take legal actions, you won't be protected in the same manner. In fact, I'm gonna give you a very sad story just to let you know the importance of this. For example, I know this European company, it wasn't our client actually, because if it was, we would inform before, right? But they have been operating in China for many years, actually almost 2 decades. They have the trademark registration back home, but they never did it in mainland China. And then a Chinese company registered in a different category and different subcategories. But the fact is it registered the same trademark. And then this Chinese company with the years became extremely big, famous. And then they start to monitor themselves IP infringements, because now you need to know it's not only foreign companies that are worried about IP infringement. Also, Chinese companies are very worried about IP infringement, so they pay attention to that. So this company identified that a foreign company was well, it doesn't matter that it was a foreign company. It just identified that another company was using the trademark, and therefore they sued them. And they lost. The foreign company lost the suit because they didn't have this registration. So they have to pay a huge economic compensation that actually costs the company to close and go back home. So that's a very sad story, and I don't really recommend to anybody. But a more common story that you may encounter also when working in this e-commerce industry is that perhaps somebody has seen your trademark in your website, in your catalog, in a fair, in a convention, and they have registered in China before of you, even before you have decide to come to China. And voila, when you come and you try to do so, you cannot. So it's important to be aware of these issues. In terms of the other measures, I won't explain too much, but two things in terms of the patents, because I'm aware that the protection term, it varies in other jurisdictions. I would like to highlight that in China, once you file in SIPO, in SIPO State IP Office, the patent for invention, you have a protection of 20 years. And for utility and model design, you have a protection of 10 years. So that's something for you to know. Now let's move to the next slide. And let's say something very obvious. I like to use examples that are kind of obvious to identify a counterfeit first. So as you can see here, of course, these two examples show us the counterfeit, right? Now, those infringements are easier to detect, but what happens when they are not that easy? So if we move to the next slide, we will see an example, a case that we have to deal with, and this possible trademark infringement work like this. On the left, you have a Taiwanese company that is called Gourmet. They registered the trademark 85 degree, and they enter into Chinese mainland market in 2007, becoming a very well-known bakery and coffee brand with many shops actually around the country. On the right side, we have the defendant Bride, which is also a very well-known dairy company in mainland China, especially in Shanghai. Now, as you can see in the packaging and in the advertising, they have written down the 85 degree. Now, that was in 2016. Why this happened is because Bride, they have a specific product, which is fresh milk. Now, because of the pasteurization technology adapted, milk sterilization temperature control at 85 degrees, so it's a very important feature to inform the consumer. They include it in the packaging. Nevertheless, Gourmet didn't understand it in that way, and therefore sued Bride. Sued Bride for trademark infringement, demanded not only the stop of the use, but also requesting a compensation of 5 million renminbi, which in the first instance was judged like this. Now, Bride, after this, of course, have to apply for an appeal, and in this case, it appeals to the Shanghai IP Court, right? Remember, we talked about the IP courts, and then after, in the second instance, finally, at the end of 2018, court dismissed the plaintiff petition. So what happened? We have infringements. Of course, you could go to litigation, but frankly speaking, it's a long process, as this example can show you. So it's always very advisable to have external advisors. If we see in the next slide, we will see in e-commerce how to detect also other type of counterfeits. Here, for example, we use this Musi example. Musi is a Japanese company, right? And Alibaba has a very interesting tool for you to know that you can upload a photo and it can check for same picture or very similar picture. And here where you can see, right, the counterfeit is very easy to identify because the price is extremely low, the item name is very different. Probably you can also check the reviews of the consumer. So for example, if they are very positive, you know, that's something wrong. If we move to the second slide, you will see also a patent, a design patent infringement. In this case, it's another Japanese company, Manchichi. The left top picture is the real one, right? These cute little dolls. But if you see above, you can see the counterfeit. Of course, the face, if it's not the same, it's almost the same, but what it changed is the clothes. Now, Mochinchi identified in the online platform so many counterfeits, and they were extremely tired of so they start to file dozens of IP litigations to stop those. And here, what is important to remark, perhaps, is when the design patent is registered, you need to pay attention to the pictures from different angles and sides, because the protection scope of a design patent is subject to the product design and the figures and photos. And in addition, you need to include a description that explains the product's design and those pictures and figures. Now let's move to how to detect, right, this infringement without, let's say, going to a file, to a lawsuit, right? So we will go to the complaint to internet service provider. If we see in the next slide, Alibaba has a very interesting IP platform. It was before the current e-commerce law. As we mentioned in the e-commerce law just a few moments ago, now you have the right to request and right to delete, to stop if you prove it. So how you can do this? So you need to register in this platform, and then when you log in, you will submit a file including all the documents that prove that you are the IP right holder. And then the Alibaba IP team, they will review all these documents and complain. And if they identify, if they verify that you are right, they will right away, they will immediately delete the online shop and also the hyperlinks, right? So actually in the next slide, I have some numbers provided from the Alibaba annual report from last year. So in those numbers, we can see that there are improvements. For example, they are able, according to this data, that 96% of the IP complaints were dealt within 24 hours, which is quite efficient. I have to say that 3-4 years ago, it wasn't that fast, but it's improving quite a lot. And also another interesting data is that the complaint number has been reduced. Of course, nevertheless, we cannot say there are no infringements online, and therefore we need to keep control and monitor of them. Now let's move to something a bit different, but I think very important for you to know. And when working in e-commerce industry, you need to be aware also of these two laws and regulations. Advertisement law was a little bit headache for many foreign companies at the beginning. Since 2015, there are many improvements, and many people have explained this. So actually right now it's less headache, but there are some aspects to be aware of, because here the key aspect is that an advertisement will be determined as a false advertisement if it deceives or misleads consumers with false or confusing content. And then here we have enumerated the main 3 circumstances. Now let's see it with examples, right? So in the next slide, we will see this picture that is a very obvious example of a false advertisement. Right, now what I want to let you know here is the fact that when you are caught with a false advertisement, you will suffer an economic penalty. And that penalty, the fine, will be calculated around 3 to 5 times the advertisement fee. Now, what happens if it's difficult to calculate the advertisement fee or the advertisement fee is too low? Then amounts will run between 200,000 renminbi to 1 million renminbi. That could be more or less the range. And now another thing extremely important for you to know is that if a company commits false advertisement more than 3 times within 2 years, that fine will not only be higher in terms of economic, but actually you could be suffering or facing the revoke of your business license. And this is very serious. So let's see in the next example. So we have an obvious false advertisement, but what happens when you are not actually intentionally committing a false advertisement, and that could happen, and that happens. So for example, this is one of our clients as well. There are multinational operating in many jurisdictions for many decades, because it's a very old company, and they were in a very specific industry, which is jewelry. Now, they never expected that a consumer make a complaint or reported a complaint to the Market Supervision Administration by stating that there was a false advertisement. So in this case, we have to prove to authorities, providing many different evidences and reports, trying to explain them that actually there was no intention of false advertisement, but what it really happened, it was that it was an incorrect description or use of wording in Chinese language. And that's it's sometimes not that easy to achieve. In this case, we did it, and therefore the company was not penalized as a false advertisement, which was very good for the company because the economic compensation was low. But on top of that, they don't have, again, this rate of 3 times cut within 2 years. But the fact that I want to show you here is, even if you do your advertisement, it's always very important to ask a professional in China to confirm that the wording, the correct wording in Chinese, complies with the laws. Now, let's move to another aspect of the advertising law that you really need to be aware of, is the article number 9. We won't go into details here, but this article states many icons, images, or words that you cannot see, you cannot use. And let's see again an obvious example in the next slide with this picture. The picture shows a car being sold online, and it's obviously violating, infringing the Article 9, right? Using this wording. But what happened in the next case? The next slide will show us an example that it might be less obvious because first of all, it might be a mistake, a human mistake. As you can see in the slide, there is the sticker of the label. There are 2 stickers and the date is different. So there is an inconformity with the information. Now, it is not only violating the advertisement law, but it also the labeling requirement. So you need to be you need to pay attention also to labeling requirements. That there are many of them, and probably you can read them on the standards. And I need to mention all of them here. But what you need to be aware of is that if it's not you or your Chinese partner or your importer or your distributor, a professional should verify that there is no incompliment of these regulations, because then you will face fines and you will face some troubles such as the goods being stuck at customs, or not being sold, or not being able to accomplish the next step. So it's very important to double check. And with this, I want to finish today's webinar. I'm very aware that I try to provide you many information in a very short time. So probably, you may have a lot of questions too, but please feel free to ask me now if we have time, and otherwise later on. Thank you very much for attention. Thank you, all of you.
Miria, thank you so much. We have just a couple of minutes left, so let me just ask something that probably will tie the whole presentation today together. In the types with the types of business models that you highlighted in the presentation, what would you recommend for somebody that's just starting off in the market to choose? Would it be to work with a partner, to set up their own company? Which of the three business models would you recommend?
Well, if you are starting, if you are a newcomer and you may have low or limited knowledge on the market, I would recommend to work with a local partner or with a partner that is already in the market, testing the market before, without perhaps establishing the legal entity, because that is a lot of things to take on, not only for the investment capital, but also in terms of management, operations. So probably going for the first model at first, it could be convenient. It could be also convenient, the third model, if you are a bigger company, because the third model is the one, the free trade zone. And you should know that when working through free trade zone, the advantages of having the goods in the bonding warehouse means that you don't need to pay taxes until the goods are sold, right? So that's a good advantages. Nevertheless, bonding warehouse are also a little bit more regulated and supervised, which is also good for the reliable, right, of the goods. But I would recommend first model or the third model, actually.
Great. So I think we're going to leave it there because we just have only a few short minutes left. Miria, again, thank you very much for joining us today. Wonderful presentation. There are questions that came in during today's presentation, and they will be forwarded to Miria, who will then answer them directly. So Miria, again, thank you very much.
Thank you everybody.
Just to finalize the end of today's presentation, as mentioned, if you do have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be happy to answer anything that you have. If you enjoyed today's webinar series or you're interested in more of the resources that we publish, you can easily subscribe on our website, or you can follow us on the various social media outlets. Either follow me or follow the company pages. Last but not least, we have our final webinar session tomorrow, Friday the 14th of June, on the actual process of shipping to China from a cross-border e-commerce perspective. My presentation is geared mostly to people that may not be willing to establish an entity in China, and they need to understand how they can function and create the e-commerce flow from their home country. So if you're interested in this topic, please do join us for tomorrow's session. It will be the last one for this webinar series. Today's session has been recorded. It will be shortly uploaded to our YouTube page, and an email will be sent out to all the registrants and attendees with the link to the YouTube channel, and as well as a PDF of today's presentation. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you again tomorrow. Goodbye.